policy. So, for instance, if we talk about, look at the Companies and Allied Matters Act. Stanley, you may please move the slide. When we talk about the Companies and Allied Matters Act of Nigeria, NOCAMA, it talks about duties of directors, and it specifically calls out issues of area for director not to make secret profit, you know, and it also talks about it talks about the fact that a director should not make secret profit, and so it addresses issues of conflict of interest, as it were. And so that's an example of where you may have local law that may be stronger than what you have in maybe individual policies, or where they are codified now. And so where I think at this stage, I'd like us to just look at some of the general principles and rules that guide conflict of interest. So one of the things that you must note is the fact that most organizations project or attempt to project an image that they meet the highest ethical standards, and that their employees should comply or act in this regard as well. A conflict of interest, the way it is set up by organization most of the time, is that if there's a conflict of interest situation, it should not adversely affect the interest of the organization. It shouldn't. And so you realize that conflict of interest policy, most of the time, it's in the interest and for the benefit of your employer. And I'm going to say a few things around this later on as we just have this conversation. You know, in some organizations, some conflict of interest are not, are permitted. Some may not be permitted as a matter of law or as a matter of regulation of the hand. While others may be permitted, it will be permitted subject to the fact that the organization has appropriate means to manage them. If an organization does not have appropriate means to manage conflict of interest situation, it will not be allowed. I once worked for an organization where the policy does not allow members of the same family to work in that organization. But there are some other organizations that allow members of the same organization to work with them. I know some banks in Nigeria whereby a husband and wife cannot work that bank. So, but one of the things that people have done most times is that people get married in some of those organizations, and then the wife continues using her maiden name, and they are married. Some of their colleagues may be aware that they are married. Some of their colleagues may be aware that they are married, and they will not disclose. But most of the time, when people do this type of thing, it is at their own detriment. You know, one of the cure, let me just put it out right now when we're talking about management of interest. The cure for management for a conflict of interest situation, the cure for it is called disclosure. Disclosure is the vaccine for conflict of interest situations. If you can disclose, then you are taking that vaccine, and it is money. You know, most of the time, failure to identify and appropriately manage conflict of interest situation could result in inappropriate or a range of adverse consequences for your employer and even for the employees. Some of the implications of a violation of conflict of interest policy includes reputational damage to the organization, financial or legal implications, damage to client relationship. It can lead to loss of client's business. It can lead to regulatory sanctions. It can lead to risk of litigation. Stanley, we can please move the slide. I'm on point 4 on general principle. When we talk about general principle around conflict of interest, one of the things that we should know as an employee or as an employer is the fact that all employees are responsible for identifying and managing conflict of interest on an ongoing basis. You are first of all responsible for identifying that. Don't leave it to your organization to identify for you. If your organization identifies it for you, most of the time, the challenge you may have is the fact that you may have violated the conflict of interest policy if your organization is identifying it and now notifying you about it. So you have a responsibility to identify it and also to manage the conflict of interest on an ongoing basis. And the first thing that you need to know is that you are required to comply with the policy in your organization as is. not the way you think it should be. And then usually if you work in an organization, you don't know how to identify conflict of interest, or how you should document if there's a situation, or how to escalate it, or how to manage it. You should please engage with your HR or the compliance unit to ask them questions so that you can clarify on how do we identify it and what do we do if I notice that there may be a potential conflict of interest. You know, on this slide, I'll just touch on a couple of things. Number one of the things that you are supposed to do as an employee is the fact that you should immediately notify your supervisor of the existence or general nature of a conflict of interest once you understand what it is. And then, wherever possible, you should avoid situations that can give rise to conflict of interest. And then, when it comes to some organization, if the organization permits you to work with your family member or your family member can work in the organization, one of the things you should do is that you should not be in a supervisory relationship with your family member. They should not be your subordinate, they should not be your direct subordinate, or should not be control relationship with them. That is, you have influence over their conditions of employment. You know, one of the ways in which you can most easily violate conflict of you can be accused of violation of conflict of interest policies that if you misuse information that is disclosed to you in the course of your work. Beyond the issue of breaching of confidentiality, you can be charged for violation of a conflict of interest. And then one of the things we should do is that if you think that there's a likelihood of a conflict of interest case, you should please notify your supervisor and engage with them or your HR, whatever system you have in your organization, to review the situation, to manage it, and if possible, to resolve it. It's not every case of conflict of interest that may be managed subject to your organization. Some you may have to just let go of it. When we look at some examples, I'll share some examples of cases and situations that I've seen. Stanley, we can go to the next slide. Paragraph 6. You know, I mentioned earlier directors of companies. This is actually statutory in CAMA, Company and Life Matters Act, in the 1990 and as well in the 2020 Company and Life Matters Act. That a director's whole fiduciary duties and they have legal responsibility to act in the best interest of their company, and they should not make a profit out of their trust or place themselves in a position where their duty or their interest may conflict, and they should not act for their own benefit or the benefit of a third person. And this same thing applies to even to employees. It applies to you. Every conflict of interest must be declared, and it should be brought to the attention of the relevant personnel in accordance with your company's policy. A conflict of interest, where promptly declared, may be permitted, provided that you have conditions and safeguards that protect them. That protects, you know, remember the catchphrase. It is conditions and safeguards that protect your employer, not necessarily you when there is an issue of a conflict of interest. And now we can go to the next slide. Let's talk about the types of conflict of interest that we have. There are basically 3 types of conflict of interest. You can have an actual case of conflict of interest. You can have a potential conflict of interest, and you can have a perceived conflict of interest. So conflict of interest can be either of those 3. An actual conflict of interest involves a real or an existing conflict between an employee's duties or the employee's responsibilities and his employer's interest. You know, where there's an existing conflict, there can be, so there's actually a direct conflict. There's a direct conflict. And so maybe you're a medical rep. You're a medical rep for an organization. You sell pharmaceutical product. And that same medical rep, open a pharmacy, open his own pharmacy, and instead of going to dispense to other pharmacies, was spending his time as supervising as a resident pharmacy in his own pharmacy. So goes out once in a while, you know, and this is an actual conflict. And then you may also have cases of what we call a potential conflict of interest. A potential conflict of interest can arise when an employee's duties or responsibility has a possibility of resulting in a conflict with his responsibilities, with his responsibility or his duties to his employer. When it has a potential, when there is likelihood that this thing can happen, it does not happen, but it's a potential conflict of interest. And thirdly, when we talk about the last time, the third type of conflict of interest, we are talking about a perceived conflict of interest. This can occur when an employee's duties or responsibilities are or may conflict his personal interest, even though there may be no actual conflict. So there may be no actual conflict. It's just perception. So this is perception. So let me give an example. This is pure perception. An employee working for maybe the employee is actually not in a, let me use one. An employee is the head of marketing for his or our organization, and there's a sales team, and that's an employee, and the marketing director's husband or wife, for instance, now happens to also be a distributor of the company's product. There may actually not be any direct conflict, but so the reasonable man, if you adopt the reasonable man's test, the reasonable man believes that no, marketing director must be giving some tips or must be giving some information, pre-written information to our husband, who is the director. So the husband may have an advantage over other distributors. And so these are the three categories of conflict of interest. Stanley, we can go to the next slide. Let's just look at one or two scenarios. I just take about two scenarios and just about scenarios, then we'll look at some examples. There are basically about 4 types of scenarios where a conflict of interest can arise. I think the first one has to do with where an employee's interest in the outcome of a particular activity or endeavor differs from his employer's interest. So where an organization, you're expecting as an employee, so your business, your organization has an interest to do a particular item, but you have your own personal interest, and that interest will confer a benefit to you or to a loved one. So that's a scenario, that's a type of conflict of interest. So most conflict of interest can fall in these 4 categories that are brought in. Or another situation is where your family member receives a financial or other significant benefits that is inappropriate in nature as a result of your own employee's position. So as a result of your employee, you are procurement manager for a company for Lori Europe, and Mr. Corporative's company is interested in doing business with you, and you are saying, look, my daughter has been applying for a role in your organization, and the individual at the party, they quickly give your daughter a job, and then you award them the contract. So it's an example. That's another scenario where it can happen. A third scenario where of conflict of interest is where an employee has the opportunity to influence the granting of business or administrate other material decisions in a manner that leads to a personal gain for that employee, or that leads to an advantage to the employee's friend or a family member. So the first two, basically, the first one benefits the individual. The second one where the employee's family member may be able to get some benefits. And the third one is where they're able to get personal gain. And then a last category, the last scenario may be where an employee has an existing financial or other interest or previous engagement in an endeavor, or with another person that could impair or it has impaired the ability to carry out his own duty to his employer. So you're a lawyer, you used to work for a law firm, you're a partner in a law firm, and then you are busy firming out jobs to the same law, to your own law firm, or the law firm that you're a silent partner. Stanley, we can move. I'll just share maybe 1 or 2 examples here. Next slide, just talk about 1 or 2 examples. Let me just pick one of them. Where an employee is involved in personal business interests, such as partnerships, shareholding, that exceeds, let me use voluntary group, for instance, 5%, your organization will be 10%, your organization may be 1%, your organization may be 0% in any company or trusteeship, which derive any income, receive any payment from contractual or other business arrangement, or compete directly with your employer. So where you have interest in a company, or maybe directly or indirectly, and that business actually, and that company does business or get any financial remuneration from your employer or from the group of companies of your employer, that can be a potential conflict of interest here. Another situation may be, another conflict of interest situation, maybe where one, for instance, let me give an example, and this happens all the time. If you use your employer's time, now let me, some of these things may sound partial, but it can be a ground for termination of employment. If you are holding mutual employment, myself and Stanley, we had to sit on various panels. Well, and this is very common with salespeople. Mr. A works as a salesperson for company A, and Mr. A also took up simultaneously another employment with company B. Because he's on the field, he's working for two companies. I've been in a situation, I've been in a panel where an individual he had two offers of employment, and he had two cars from his two organizations, two laptops. And so when their regional manager is coming around, his driver drives one of the vehicles, he drives the other one. Of course, it's a recipe for a short life, what they do, but they think they are being smart. But the strange thing was, not the strange thing, what normally happens most of the time is the fact that most people, when they are found out and they face a panel, they are usually dismissed. One of the cases I started, the individual lost the employment with us, and the next day, the other employer discovered as well. So he lost 2 jobs in a space of 2 days. An employee's obligation to conflict of interest. Employees have a contractual obligation of loyalty to your employer. Please never forget it. You have a contractual obligation of loyalty to your employer. A conflict of interest gives rise to risk of one or more of these. Number one, the organization can fail to comply with legal or regulatory obligations. As an employee, you may fail to fulfill a duty of care that you owe to the organization or to your client. And then it can, if a conflict of interest here can also lead to where an employee's professional judgment or objectivity is compromised or hinders the proper discharge of their duties. And a conflict of interest can also lead to employees engaging on ethical conduct. As I mentioned earlier, conflict of interest is the gateway to corruption. It is the gateway. If you analyze it generally, we can't go into a lot of this, but I'll just leave this there. Maybe when Stanley organizes a master class on conflict of interest, we can have a detailed conversation around it. And then, what are the consequences for breach of conflict of interest policy? Stanley, you may please move to the next slide. These are some of the, if there's a breach of the conflict of interest policy, in most organizations, an employee is deemed to be non-compliant with the policy of conflict of interest when it is subsequently discovered that one, he or she failed to declare a conflict of interest within a reasonable period of time. Note that word, reasonable period of time, or disclose inaccurate or inadequate information in relation to a conflict of interest. And thirdly, where the employee does not comply with parts or the whole of an action plan that was drawn up for him or her. And so for organizations, most of the time, issues of conflict of interest in meting out the sanction, it starts from verbal warning all the way to separation from employment. And what do I mean by separation from employment? It can be in form of termination, service no longer required, dismissal, depending on what they want, or depending on the policy of your organization. Even for a director can be fined, or it can be imprisoned, or they can be removed, and they can even be signed for not being a director of a public interest company for a number of years. And so the big question in the app, the big question, Stanley, can move to the next slide. The big question why we're having this conversation is that how do we manage the side hustle dilemma? You know, a lot of time, thanks to a lot of motivational speakers and people who are encouraging people, we are told you should have a plan B. Start your plan B while working. And a lot of us are thinking about it. So how do I do my plan B? What can I do? You know, I have a side hustle. What should I do? You know, and a lot of people have side B. I once visited a sales region. I was having conversations with them, and I asked them. I said, "How many of you have side gig or you have a side hustle?" Nobody lifted their hand. Everybody just very quiet. And when I now said, "It is not wrong to have a side hustle. It just depends on how you manage that issue." So people started lifting up their hands. Okay, I do this type of business. I do that type of business. You know, one of the things that has always helped employees that also help is that if you are in conflict, ask. You lose nothing from asking. Let your employer put on record that this person asked and they told you that, oh, there's no conflict. You know, so when we talk about what is side hustle, you know, a lot of people talk, what is a side gig? This is maybe a business or a work that you do outside your regular, outside your 8 to 5 or your, depending on where you work, maybe outside your 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. work. And I mean, you know, so the questions that are thrown up here are rhetorical questions. Most people have side hustle, but how can you legitimately have a side hustle that does not impact or affect your obligation to your employer? Now, if you've got questions around this, like Stanley said, you can put them in the comment section. I will soon wrap up. This is my last slide on this topic. Can an employee engage in side hustle? When is it appropriate for an employee to have a side hustle? One of the things you must know is that as an employee, you have a duty of obligation you have a duty and an obligation of loyalty to your employer. One of the things that you have to do is to ensure that first and foremost, no matter what side hustle you are doing, it does not conflict with, make sure it does not conflict with what you are employed to do. My general rule when it comes to side hustle, I always tell people that do every business. And an average Nigerian is entrepreneurial in nature. An average Nigerian, you want to do something because your mother probably was a teacher and your mother also had a shop. Your father was working in civil service. Your father had a barber shop. So we've all grown, a good number of us grew up with where our fathers had other businesses, our parents had other businesses. We also want to do the same thing. And there is nothing wrong with you having, so let's call it out. There's nothing wrong with you having a side hustle. What is where you have an issue is where your side hustle is conflicting with your obligation to your employer. So for instance, let me use my question. So Mr. A, let's say I am a lawyer, I work in-house for a company, and I happen to have, and maybe I have a real estate property, I do agency, I rent out houses, maybe over the weekend, or have an online business that rents out houses that people can check, and I have somebody managing it for me. You know, and you realize that number one, there's no direct conflict. I mean, there can be a direct conflict. There can be a conflict. If my employer wants to rent a property, and I am now the one I'm renting them a property through my organization, or I appoint my own firm to be the agent that is looking for a property for them, there can be a conflict in that kind of situation. You know, a lot of things that people go into right now, a lot of people have farms. So you have a farm, and you've got a farm, and then you say, oh, it doesn't conflict. But maybe you close early to go and feed your chicken. If you are using the time that your employer has paid for, then there's a conflict of interest in that your side hustle versus what you are doing. But I know that this conversation is not, around side hustle and question. I would like to throw it open now for us to probably maybe address questions or comments around this. I think one of the things which, if I summarize some of the things I've been able to do, I've been able to explain to you what the conflict of interest is. I've been able to explain to you the different types of conflict of interest. I've been able to explain to you the 4 categories, that scenarios that conflict of interest can fall under. I've also been able to explain to you the fact that conflict of interest, that the cure for conflict of interest is disclosure. And the fact that as an employee, the balance of conflict of interest is not in your favor, it's always in the side of your employer, except there's a disclosure. You know, there's a slang permit me, I'm a Yoruba man, there's a slang that they use sometimes. You know, you watch some of these films, and then someone will tell you that you may hear a word like want to get here. That is, if conflict of interest is one of the easiest options, through which they don't get that guy. If anybody's going to, if somebody wants to be set up, the easiest way to set up an employee is for evaluation of conflict of interest. And most of the time, it is not interpreted in your favor. The only cure why it can be interpreted in your favor is if you have done adequate disclosure. So, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for this time. Stanley, over to you for the question and answer session.
All right. Thank you, Leia. Thank you. I mean, Leia is one person that I have spent several years doing this work with, and we have sat in several panels. And like you said, I feel very pained sometimes when I see young talents who have got great potential to drive their careers into something big and great in the future, losing their jobs because of something they could better manage. Okay, because our time is fast spent, I will just go straight into the questions now. If you've got any question, please drop them in the chat room. Some of you sent questions earlier. Please, can you go and repost them so that I read them out very quickly? We just got about maybe 10 minutes, 10-15 minutes, and we'll be done. Okay. Yeah, I see one of the questions. I'll take it. And then if you have any, drop it as we progress with this. So Leia, I have someone here who would like to know. So my question is to the legal professional is, why do employers feel very emotional when they discover that an employee working for such an organization but have its own family business or company while working with his or her employer? And how do we manage this to avert conflict of interest? Is it out of place to work as an employee and having his or her family business slash company? Thank you, Alan Odiase. Okay, over to you. I think you've said something about this, but I'll let you handle this, Leia. Please take it away.
All right. Thanks, Stanley. I think I've been able to address this question in the course of the training. There is, you also need to know the sensitivities of your employer. And some organizations where you have structured approach, you can actually, whether your organization is structured or not structured. I have a friend that joined a multinational, and upon his joining, the first thing he did to them was I wrote to HR and said that apart from my salary, I also earn income from my family business. So my family does this type of business, so which he disclosed to them upfront. So there is no the issue of getting an emotion after that doesn't happen. Of course, you receive your employment letter today, and before you get it, say, let me tell you, before you get the employment letter, I do a BC, except if something that conflicts with that business. And so you should, number one, disclose to your employer first and foremost if you have his personal business, depending on your organization and the mode of growth. That's why I said that it depends on your organization. You can talk to your HR, or you can speak to your compliance officer in your organization to find out what's the mode of disclosure. If you do, and one of the other big problems you have is that if your organization, you do not have people who are knowledgeable in managing issues of conflict of interest, it can be used as a tool to exit employees. Because if they are not knowledgeable about it and they violate it, then they can be exited. So disclosure is your solution. Disclose to them upfront. The emotional, like I said, conflict of interest is not in the best interest of, it's not resolved in the interest of the employee. It always resolve the interest of the employer. I hope I've been able to shed some light, maybe to address your question, Stanley.
All right, thank you, Leia. Any other question? Any other question, or do you want to If you want to build on this particular question, you can still build on it. We've got a few minutes, and we'll close this in if we do not have any other question. But while we wait for further questions, Leia, I want to say a very big thank you for the time you've taken to prepare these slides, and your time here with us this morning, sharing this your experience managing conflict of interest. And I want to believe that for every one of us here today, we have been strongly impacted by the knowledge that you have shared. I can agree that we all have or most of us have got stuff that we handle or by the side, and some of us too have been very have struggled to be open about these things. Trust me, guys, conflict of interest is not a death sentence. I mean, if you understand what I mean, conflict of interest really can be well managed if we are open enough to declare early enough. Okay, most of us have had issues. I've worked in an organization where I had a cousin work with me in the same organization, but what I had to do was to declare early up front, and that was well managed. And we can manage every conflict and still be able to enjoy our careers and enjoy our jobs. Okay, all right. So thank you for coming here today. So I want to say again, if you are here on this call with us and you are not following us yet on our social media handle, please look for us on IG, Instagram, on IG, on Twitter, on Facebook. We are called Moments with Stanley, and please follow us, because we will be doing a lot of live sessions and we'll be bringing guests like this to join us going forward. We're going to be very busy because we need to really equip people to develop their careers, develop themselves personally, and to drive personal effectiveness. So on this note, if we don't have any other question, I want to say a very big thank you to members of my team who have made this happen. I have Joy Onagise on this call. Joy helped drive this and made this happen. Joy, thank you so much for the beautiful work you're doing. Thank you, Chris Jato, for all the work you're doing to get studio ready and set for the work that lies ahead of us. Guys, it's going to be amazing. Look forward to our posts. Look forward to the comments that will be coming. Who is this person that is not okay? I need to mute every other person now. All right, so I'm bringing this to a close right now. Thank you, everyone. Do have an amazing day and an amazing weekend. We look forward to seeing you again on our platform in the coming days. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Stanley. Thanks, Leia.
Thanks, Bolaji. We'll see you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Stanley. Thank you, Bolaji. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Nice
much.
having you guys. Nice having you. See you. Right. We see everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Enjoy the rest of your weekend, guys.
God bless you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome,
Stanley.
guys.
Thank you,
We're going to see you again on IG in a few days. I'm going to be having a live session very soon, and I'll be talking about my Be Better series. So get ready and join us.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, bro. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome.
Bye.
Thank you for joining, guys. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Stanley. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Leia. See you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah.
See you guys. Yeah.
Bye.
That's it. That's the spirit.
Take off. Amen.
All right. So I end the session now. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.